Well, let's find out a little bit more and go to one of my favourite guests from the UK when it comes to finance, Jonathan Davis from Jonathan Davis Wealth Management. Good morning, Jonathan. How are you this morning?
Good morning, Steve. I'm very well, thank you very much. And it's above freezing in England.
Well, you're having a little heat wave over there, aren't you?
Yeah, anything above freezing. It's we're not at all envious of you guys in Spain. Not in the slightest.
No, I was looking at the weather this morning in Sky, looking at the temperatures for today, and I was thinking, that's good, because I'm going over to London tomorrow morning for a couple of days in business, and I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to take the sunshine with me. Brilliant. No winter clothes required. So that's good. Right. Okay, down to business. Now, Jonathan, people have heard you on here before and, talking quite candidly, a lot more candidly about what goes on in the financial markets and kind of trying to give people a bit of a wake-up call. Would that be a fair assessment of what you're trying to do?
I think it's a very good assessment. I've been, for one better phrase, been doing stuff in the media for the last 7 years now, national, regional and international. And several years ago, this was before the biggest economic and financial collapse in history, when I said that we're going to have something of that order, I was literally laughed at on air. And then when it was happening, people almost still couldn't believe that it was happening. And here I am in the southeast of England, where many of your listeners will know that we had a bit of a downturn for a couple of years, and then we had an upturn again. And people then assumed, oh, well, it's all sorted. Well, it wasn't sorted. It's because the then government borrowed a vast amount of money, pumped it into the system. All they did was paper some cracks. So yes, I'm trying to get the message out there. The global economy is dire, and people need to look after themselves, because no government is going to do it for you. They'll bail out banks, but they won't bail out you.
Yeah, well, like you, I mean, I've been peddling this for a couple, three years now, and ever since the initial crash, and it's saying, I mean, do you know what gets me, Jonathan? I'm no economic genius. A basic economics, which I did through my Business Studies HNC. That's it. But you don't need to be a genius to see what's going on and to see that what they were putting into place was papering over the cracks. But like you, I was out there. I was, off my head. Oh, he doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't know. And here we are. It's hitting us in the face.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's brilliant, and more power to your elbow, as they say. There are a few other commentators, largely not in the mainstream media, who get it, like yourself. In the mainstream media, it's easier for me to pot a black on a 12-foot billiard table, which I never can do, than to find someone in the national news who actually gets it and says it in such a way that people will realise that, we're not comics, we're not trying to create disorder or anything like that. What we're trying to do is get reality out there. And unfortunately, as I've been writing, as you say, I'm a wealth manager, so I write economic markets updates to clients. And as I've been writing recently, it'll be after it hits the fan that the people in general will finally wake up to what actually has been happening. Unfortunately, it'll be by then too late.
Now, I heard you just about a week or so ago, maybe slightly longer, on Stephen Nolan's show on 5 Live on a Friday evening, where again, the other guy that you had in the studio said that you were exaggerating. And, it was all... and so you must get a little bit frustrated with that constantly. But moving on slightly... talking about the clip that my breakfast presenter Howard played earlier on this morning with this Italian trader saying Goldman Sachs rule the world. Can you just, for my listeners, break that down, exactly why he said that?
Yeah. First of all, I can't remember the chap's name, but because I too only saw the piece that he did to the BBC News channel a few days ago. I only saw it yesterday. I love this guy. This is the first guy from the city who makes his money by buying and selling stocks and shares, who said it as it is. The thing he specifically said was, Goldman Sachs rule the world, not the politicians. And you're asking me why he said that? Well, it's quite simply because whether or not it's specifically Goldman Sachs, or should we say the global banking community, they have created a situation, particularly in the West, but not just in the West, where by enticing governments to borrow beyond belief, governments, well, literally as well as metaphorically, are now in hock to the bankers. The bankers run the show. And the bankers have been able to convince the politicians that the bankers need to be supported and bailed out when there's problems every single time, because the politicians have taken the line, well, when the banks are making money, making profits, there's good employment, there's good taxes being paid, and the politicians get their money in so they can do their projects that they want to do. The problem is, of course, what the banks do to make money is all illusory, it's all short-term, because without a shadow of a doubt, given a bit of time and all those years of profits turn into losses. And that's when the buck has to be paid. And who's paying it? Not the governments per se. It's not their money. It's your money and my money. It's the taxpayers' money. Now, I'm not talking here about Labour or Conservative. This is apolitical because successive governments have colluded with the banks in this way. But I will say this. Margaret Thatcher said, the problem with socialism is eventually you run out of taxpayers. And that's the issue we have. We do not have a capitalist society, which I would love that we did. Because if we did, when the banks lost all that money, they'd be let to go out in the rear. They'd go bankrupt. And we, the taxpayers, would not be landed with the vast bills, which we have been. And that's why, in effect, we have largely socialist tendencies throughout the world, even though they pretend that it's capitalism. It's not. And certainly, and I can see people will be rushing to the dictionaries, some people, and what we have is a plutocracy. In other words, a small financial elite are running the show, and that's what's going on.
Right. Now, immediately, when you start saying that, because I've suffered from it, people start saying, oh, conspiracy theory is a lot of rubbish. You know, why do you think people just can't wake up to what the actual cold facts are here?
Yeah, because it's beyond their ken. As you say, it appears that because, someone like me, I talk forcefully and passionately, I sound like a Trotskyite or, some bloke with a Molotov cocktail. Actually, I'm a capitalist. I believe in wealth creation. I do not believe in governments conspiring with elites, which has in fact been what has been happening for years, if not decades. And the financial and political elites, they get to do and achieve what they want to achieve, and we are the ones landed with the bills. That is only ever going to work in the short term. In the long term, what it does is decimate economies and indeed societies. And people need to wake up to reality.
Now, people just need to just think carefully about stories they've read in the newspapers just over the last 3 or 4 years about the likes of Mr. Mandelson, Mr. Osborne, being guests on the yacht of one of the Rothschild heirs. And it's there staring them in the face.
Yes, it is, and also it's a problem with our media, the mainstream media, and people don't quite understand what I mean by that. I'm talking about the likes of the BBC and ITV in the UK, the national press. They actually are part of the problem, because it serves the mainstream media well to support whatever government is in power at that point in time. And although they pretend to be balanced reporters, my view, and this is something that I've taken the view of over about the last decade, I have picked gaping holes in what these guys have been saying. I'll tell you, one thing that really gets my goat is that the mainstream media allows the politicians to pretend that there is a Grand Canyon between them, whether it's the left or the right, the Labour or the Tories. Well, I'm telling you, because in my view, the most important issue in our society is our economy. And if we can get our economy right, we can get our health right, we can get our education right, we can get our defence right, and so on, and social services, and so on and so on. Actually, when you look at it, there is very little difference. There's wafer-thin difference between left and right, certainly in the UK, and I believe across Europe and across most of the world. They're all about bailing out the banks. And when you think about it, the amount of money that Gordon Brown and Ed Balls borrowed a couple of years ago to, quote, save the world, unquote, nothing could be further from the truth, hundreds of billions of pounds, it pales everything else into insignificance, whether it's housing benefit, immigration costs, defence costs, health costs. You know, we spend in the UK £110 billion on the NHS every year. Well, think about it. We gave hundreds of billions of pounds to a couple of 100,000 bankers, and people should really chew on that.
Yeah, but that's a sobering thought, that what you've just come out with there. Now, the other thing that's going on at the moment, and I know Lisa has covered it, but not everybody will have heard the nighttime show here, about what's going on in New York at the moment with the protests in Wall Street.
Yes, Occupy Wall Street. It's not quite rioting. It's people who are peacefully demonstrating in Wall Street, and they're telling the world that there's something amiss, there's something not quite right. You've got 45 million Americans on food stamps. You've had a house price crash of 40% in the US. They've still got debts up to here, and yet Wall Street participants are still making masses and masses of money. And the reason why they're doing it is because they're supported by Barack Obama and the Federal Reserve, the central bank. And what's amazing about Occupy Wall Street is that it's quite a major thing happening, and yet, where is it in the mainstream media? Absolutely nowhere.
No, it's not. I mean, Lisa covered it last night, and apparently the New York police have been very, very heavy-handed in there as well, and trying to put it down. Just to go back to what you touched on Obama there, and something I meant to mention when we were talking about Goldman Sachs, again, for people who don't know, and we're not talking rubbish here, look it up, it's there to be found. Most of Obama's financial advisors are former Goldman Sachs employees, aren't they?
Oh, indeed. And that goes back to what this trader was saying on the BBC a few days ago. Goldman Sachs rules the world. Again, you're absolutely correct. Look it up. It's a simple fact that in America, you've got Tim Geithner, who's the Treasury Secretary, like our Chancellor. The previous Treasury Secretary, Hank Paulson. These are ex-Goldman Sachs guys. You've got much of the Federal Reserve, the central bank, is ex-Goldman Sachs. Then look around Europe, look at the central banks in Europe, and they're ex-Goldman Sachs.
Yeah.
And indeed, in the UK, I can't quite remember just off the top of my head, but there's a new institution being created, and it's to help to help the Treasury. And who is it run by? An ex-Goldman Sachs guy. And finally, one other thing I have remembered, the Monetary Policy Committee in the UK, which sets interest rates. What is the most recent appointment to the committee? A guy who's just left Goldman Sachs. They call Goldman... we're talking about Goldman Sachs here. Actually, it's global banking. It could be JP Morgan. It could be Citibank. The global banks could be even Royal Bank of Scotland, Barclays. They have tentacles at the highest levels of governments. And that's why we metaphorically say Goldman Sachs rules the world. And if people believe that they live in democracies just because they have a vote, well, let me ask them to choose something else over. In the UK, which I talk about a lot because I live here and have grown up here, in the UK, we, of course, have one person, one vote. And yet, when you think about it, the bulk of MP constituencies are safe seats. You cannot dislodge a government because only relatively few of the seats ever change hands. Yeah. So, is that a democracy? You ever think about that?
Well, just final word before you go. Where do you see this all going? There's going to be another recession, isn't there?
Look, Steve, your listeners need to understand this simple reality. We are in depression. And, when you've got between 0 and 1% annual growth, when you need 2% annual growth just to stand still, there you have depression. For the last 5 years, we've had no growth in the United Kingdom. In the UK, the size of our economy, the GDP, the gross domestic product, is no larger than that of 2006. So, your listeners in Spain and across Europe, of course, it's hurting you very hard. And you go around certain regions in the UK. Look at Northern Ireland, for example. All we hear about is how London House President Lakshmi Mittal, the steel magnate, he's bought another £100 million house. Oh, the housing market. Well, I'll tell you, Northern Ireland, house prices are down 47% from 2007. 47%. So it'll come to the southeast of England as well. We are in depression because the politicians have gone down the route of continually borrowing vast sums and bailing out banks. And, they're talking about what's going to happen to Greece and so on, Italy and Spain. It's not about bailing out countries. It's about bailing out the lenders who loaned recklessly to the countries. And that's the issue. What we should actually do is tell the banks where to go. You shouldn't have loaned the money in the first place. You knew you weren't going to get the money back. You should go bust. And I'll tell you, it would create a couple of years of hard recession, no doubt. But after a couple of years, for lots of reasons, next time we talk, or if you've got time we can talk about it, we would have 20 years of growth. This way, by continually bailing out the banks, we're doing exactly the same as Japan has been doing since 1989. They have been in depression for 22 years and counting, and that is where we are. Instead, we should take the pain now, and then we can have some growth for a long time.
Right, now I'm going to have to move on to do other things that are booked in, but well, that is a bigger story. I'm going to get you back another sometime next week, and we'll follow through on that one. Okay?
Sure.
But general advice: give Jonathan a phone. Jonathan, listen.
Well, I'll tell you, we have just done an economic and markets update. Anyone who wants to send me their email address, they can Google me, or it's jonathandaviswm.com. I'll happily put them on the mailing list, and it will open people's eyes. And the simple fact is, our clients are up the last couple of months. Most clients are down the last couple of months.
Okay, Jonathan, from Jonathan Davis Wealth Management. Listen, thank you very much for your time this morning and for coming on so quickly, Jonathan. I appreciate that, and I'll speak to you next week, okay?
My great pleasure. All the best.
You
Bye-bye.
take care. Bye-bye.